In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. Success is about building something meaningful that outlives you. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 transformative themes: the power of financial clarity, scaling a business with purpose, and the art of sustainable growth. Our guest today is Stewart Ervin, a visionary fractional CFO and founder of Bracket Management. Stewart's expertise in business turnaround, financial strategy, and leadership has helped countless small to medium-sized businesses break through growth ceilings. Whether it's mastering pricing strategies, optimizing cost management, or building a resilient culture, Stewart brings a wealth of insights that every entrepreneur needs to hear. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Stewart Ervin, thank you for being on a Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Sam. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure having you here, sir. And diving into your story was very inspiring. So I'm glad to have you here and have a chance to discuss deeply. To kick us off, tell us more about Bracket Management.
Yes, so Bracket Management is a fractional CFO service. And for those who don't necessarily know what a fractional CFO service offers, for me, we partner with small and medium-sized businesses to help the business owner who may not need a full-time CFO but wants the benefit of a seasoned finance professional. It could be a business owner who has reached a limit from growth, or and sometimes you've actually seen their growth or profits start to go backwards, and they've reached a ceiling. They really just don't know what to do next, and they can't necessarily afford a full-time CFO, so they would bring in a fractional CFO. And in some cases, it's just a business owner that says, you know what, I just know that to take my business to the next level, I need to bring on a seasoned finance guy because I've reached a limit of what I can understand and know. And so for me, you can serve 5, 6, 7, 8 different businesses. You have some scalability there. And it's a way I say it, it's a fractional impact to the company, but it's exponential results because we just continue to add results and growth to our companies and clients.
Interesting. And one thing that struck me as very interesting for me was basically you starting to have a business interest as a teen. Is it basically running in the family, just this the entrepreneurial genes?
Yeah, so it's unique in that when at a very young age, probably 10, 11, 12 years old, is I really started to focus in on wanting to be, self-employed or really kind of wanting to be in business. My mom will tell you that when I was a very young kid, and I don't remember this, that I had the entrepreneurial spirit even back when I was young. But again, I don't remember the details, but I knew I wanted to do business of some sort. But what I didn't know is that I want to be an entrepreneur, that I want to go into small business, that I want to go into corporate setting. Now, my dad actually did start a business when I was 15. And that is actually where I somewhat got my start in business. But I set out in my late teens and early 20s, and I really worked in every single aspect. I did start my first business at 16 years old. But I wouldn't necessarily say the entrepreneurship runs in the family. Again, my dad had just had an opportunity and he executed on that opportunity. But if you really look outside beyond that, I'm really the only one of my family, my brothers, and so on and so forth, that's kind of been bitten with the entrepreneurial bug.
Interesting. And because your journey, basically, like you said, starting your first business at 16s, and then basically you hold a couple of very interesting corporate roles as well. Dive me a little bit more when you're kind of like, bring me back to that time where you have this small business at 16s, you enter the corporate world. How does that feel? And perhaps, was that what you were expecting from basically the corporate world when you entered it?
Yeah, so it was one of those deals where I started working for my dad again, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old at the entry level position within his company. So his company was a vinyl fence wholesaler. So if you're not familiar with that, they basically took vinyl profiles that are very similar to wood, and they would fabricate it into the fence styles and sell it to the fence companies that would ultimately end up installing it in the end-use customers' yards. So what was happening was the customers were starting, the fence installers and companies were starting to say, man, we're overbooked. I need some help. So my dad's like, hey, I've got two sons. If you teach them how to install fence, they can definitely help, because the summer periods were when the fencing industry would kind of blossom, kind of sink back down in the winter. And so we would go in I was 16, and I'd go in with my younger brother, and we learned how to do fence installations, and we started doing subcontract work for a variety of fence companies in our general area. And then I got to recognizing, well, I could do this. I have all the tools. I have the truck. I have the knowledge. Why don't I just prop up a little company and start marketing the business as my own and start selling to the end-use customers as well? Obviously, I have an in because I work for the fabricator, and that's really where it started. Now, I ran the fence company for probably almost 15 years on the side. It helped me finance my MBA, and so it paid dividends in regards to what it was able to do for me professionally. But I knew that I didn't want to just be a fence company. I'm not knocking that, but I knew that wasn't my ultimate goal. I still had aspirations of doing something really big. And so I get out of high school. I'm working basically semi full time for my dad in a professional setting. And luckily for me, I started at the very beginning, at the very entry level, and I worked every position within the company, and ultimately got to the top where the only position I would have left would basically take his job. And I knew after being there almost a decade, I was like, this is not, I got to try something different. So I had a high school buddy who called me and said, hey, I've got this corporate opportunity. And it was a buyer position. So I was doing some buying at the time in my current role. And what was funny is like the amount of spending dollars that I was managing at Southern Vinyl was probably only about $500,000 a year. And this particular opportunity was about $154 million a year. So you're talking about a dramatic jump. But again, I had learned the nuts and bolts. And so I was able to secure that job. And that was really my first corporate gig. And it taught me a ton, right? So I was coming from a small family business up into a global, right, major company with major spend. And that's where I learned on the budgets and the finance stuff and so on and so forth. That entire time frame, I had started investing heavily in real estate. I still had my fence company working full time. And I said, I've done the small business gig. I've tried the corporate gig. I think I have enough going on outside that I'm going to go try the entrepreneurship route. And so I stepped out in faith, and I started, again, flipping houses full time. I had the fence company. Flipping houses led to starting a remodeling business, because we'd be in the neighborhoods flipping the houses. We'd have neighbors come in and say, hey, would you come fix X, Y, or Z? And so, again, it somewhat blossomed into having a variety of small businesses. And so it's just really it just kind of fell in my lap, right? Everything just kind of worked its way through. And then, so I found myself in 2010, I had worked all three aspects of small business, entrepreneurship, large business. And I was kind of at a crossroads where I had to make a decision of, where am I going to go? Am I going to stick with the corporate route? Am I going to stick with entrepreneurship, and I'm going to go the corporate route? I had somewhat decided that I knew I didn't want to do the small business stuff. And so in 2010, I decided to go the corporate route.
It's very interesting, because this reminds me of a quote by Howard Truman, which is basically a career is what you're paid for, but basically a calling is what you're made for. And I love what you said on this, which is, and obviously not knocking on anybody, but you had to feel like you had an ambition for more. Now, when you're bringing yourself back at that time, where do you think that fuel comes in? Where does that basically come from?
Yeah, so it's unique, and I think it's how I'm wired. It's my DNA. So, my wife will tell you I'm never in the present, and I'm always 4 or 5 years down the road, right? And so I don't think I'm that way, but everyone around me will tell me I'm that way. I actually had from a leadership standpoint, I had a little bit of a slap in the face where it was roughly about 2020. I had an employee tell me, listen, you are always so far down the road that you leave all of us in the dust. You know where you know where you want to go and you know how to get there, but you're not doing a good job of teaching us how to go with you. And so again, I don't recognize that. So I think a lot of it's just my DNA and how I'm wired. Um, and it's like, even today with the business that I run today, it's very funny because my first two clients were people that were in my circle, and they both said, "Okay, look, we'll agree to go, to hire you to be our fractional CFO, but we know that's going to be very short lived because we know you, and you want to be the biggest fractional CFO firm in the country. So, what does it look like when Stewart's no longer part of the picture?" So again, I think it just bleeds. It's just who I am and how I'm wired.
Yes, and I love that. I love that you know who you are and you're just standing up for it. One thing that you talk a lot about is the art of value creations, kind of like purpose and profits alongside each other, which is quite meaningful. You discuss a lot about the three pillars, basically, of creating business value: pricing strategies, cost management, and growth opportunities. Tell me more how basically you navigate all of these in a purposeful manner.
Yeah. So it's if you really break it down and you look at how do you create value or profits, it is actually very simple, right? You have pricing strategy. How do you price your service or a product offering? For every dollar in incremental price that you get flows directly to the bottom line. So that means when you're pricing something or you're looking at a year over year contract and you sit this year and you look at last year's pricing strategies, what are you doing to make sure you're squeezing out to get the most price that would also bring the most value to your customer? I had a guy call me about 3 weeks ago, and he said, "Look, I've been doing year over year price increases forever." He said, "I normally pass out notices or send out notifications that we're going to take our prices up." He said, "I don't think I'm going to do that this year." And he said, "Because I get sick of having my customers call and complain." He said, "Albeit it's a very small subset, um, they still call and complain." I said, "Well, okay, well, what's the mindset behind that?" And his comment was, "Well, my customers don't, or my suppliers don't do that to me." And I said, "Yeah, but there's a difference. Your suppliers are dealing with you on a tactical, right? There's no relationship built there. Your goal is to develop a relationship with your customer base. So therefore, you need to make sure that if you do your price increase by 3%, you're also trying to give 3% of extra value in some way. And so that means that everything, when you start doing your pricing, you have to have meaning behind how you charge what you charge, because you will be questioned about, why am I paying this, or why did that go up, so on and so forth. So I told them flat out, you've got to make sure that you advise your customers as to what your price is going up to. It would be great to give them a little breakdown as to why, but then I'll immediately follow up with, but this is the actual value that I'm going to try to give you in regards to, right? So that's how that works. Every dollar that you can get in pricing flows directly to the bottom line. The next one is cost reduction or cost strategies. A lot of times as companies grow, you'll note that their cost position typically increases. And in many cases, it'll go beyond what the sales dollars have gone. So you'll see that the revenue is going up as X, and all of a sudden the costs go up dramatically more because they get excited and pumped about, oh man, my business is growing, everything's great. But the real goal is to not only keep your cost basis the same, but try to reduce it. Just the same as every dollar earned in pricing goes to the bottom line, every dollar saved goes to the bottom line. So it means you come in every day and you're very intentional with how you manage your cost. Again, the goal is to try to reduce it. So when you build out your budgets and you put in certain targets, your goal is to try to ensure that you're put some type of reduction in place so you can save that money to grow and add value that way. The last major focus there is on new business development. Again, a lot of times you'll see smaller businesses, they'll get satisfied or happy with where the business is headed, so they'll get a little stagnant and they'll just say, oh, everything is great. And all of a sudden they look up and they're not properly diversified. They have one customer that has grown with them tremendously, and they're very lopsided. And any change in either that industry or change in that customer's behavior would tend to rock your business, because again, we've relied heavily on customer X or industry X. So if you come in and have a meaningful drive to, I need to make sure that I am properly diversified and I'm continuing to grow my business with new customers, new products, new industries. It just makes your business all overall healthy. You also need to have new business that you can continue to take cost out of, and new business that you can continue to have pricing strategies added to it. So again, those are the three ways to generate value, because those are the three drivers in regards to what it takes to increase profits.
Beautiful. And something you said, which I think was very clever, is profitability without purpose is like a house with no foundations. It may look good, but it won't stand the test of time. It's very interesting and very, I would go as far as saying clever to hear a finance guy, a CFO, talking about purpose so much. Why do you think that's such a key portion of everything you're doing, and perhaps making you, that's the brand a differentiator, in my opinion, that just truly set you away?
Yeah, so it's really my corporate journey ended, roughly a year ago. When I got the idea to kind of rebrand Bracket. So Bracket really started in 2008. We shelved it in 2010, and I took 10 years roughly to, try the corporate route. But in that corporate experience, I worked for the most profitable aerospace company in the world. They were the third largest aerospace company in the world, and I had worked in so many companies and worked with so many different companies up until that point. There was something that they were doing different. And so I was there for 4 years. And in that time frame, the one thing that I really noticed was they made sure that everything you did every day was with intent and purpose. They did not tolerate anything less than driving your business forward, being extremely disciplined with intent and purpose. And I saw that culture. I saw how that worked, and I obviously saw the profits that came from that mindset. And it was one of those things, is like the entire time that I'm there, all I could think about was, if I could take this information and this mindset and go apply it to these small businesses, you could change the world when it comes to small business management. Because again, so many times in the small business arena, you have a founder or an entrepreneur who they don't necessarily know business in and out. They understand a product. They're actually the guys who started it. And so many times they're stuck in the day-to-day in the weeds, and they can't see their way out of it. And I thought, I need to be able to preach this gospel of driving your business forward with intent, looking out the windshield versus the rearview mirror to where you've come from, and act with extreme discipline. And it was amazing at what it did for that business, and now what it has done for my clients.
Yes, and one thing that is very that I hear a lot from you is strategic. Is you're very, very meticulous when it comes to making sure everybody's understanding the game plan, the blueprint, perhaps. And one thing you talk a lot about is communications. You touched a little bit at the beginning of this podcast, but communication plans that inspire connections. That's how basically you unsolve the first key play of any business trying to build financial health. I suppose why communication is number one, and how perhaps people can be better at communicating within this subject.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we focus on in the communication play is, why does your business exist, and does everyone know why? That goes from your customers to your employees, even sometimes to yourself. And then once you understand the why, you want to also understand, are you winning at your why? And so the one things we put in place is, if you don't understand your why, then again, you hear it all the time, then you need to develop your mission, vision, and values. Once that is established, then you can set that in place. Now you can hire, fire, promote. It helps you when you're trying to bring in customers. Does it fit your why? Why do you exist? Once that is established and understood, we always want to make sure that we're working in our why. Because again, your goal is to be very strategic, focus on, this is my why and this is where I want to go. I find that a lot of times these small business guys, they'll chase a shiny object. Ooh, this is an opportunity. I really want to go do this. And so they'll be off doing all this work towards this, and it's really not inside their why. And so the goal of establishing all that is sticking within your parameters, stick with what you're good at, be the best at this, and then watch what happens. So again, you establish that, you understand the baseline. Then we're going to focus on, how are we ensuring that we're hitting that why? And that's going to be on a day-to-day basis, right? Because one of the plays that we'll probably get to a little bit later is play number 2, which is developing an annual plan from a budget standpoint. So the reality is you start at the top and work backwards. And so if you start your annual plan and you look at it on a quarterly basis, you break it down into a month and then a week and then a day. It's very simple. If you win your day, you win your week, you win your month, quarter, year. So you start at the top, work your way all the way to the bottom, break it up in those small chunks. Is much easier to manage. So now you have your guardrails. You know where I'm at in regards to what I have to do on an annual, semi, quarter, month, week, day basis. And then you just develop a series of meetings around that. And so you go to a daily stand-up, a weekly tactical, a quarterly strategic, and now all of a sudden you're realizing, man, I'm starting to hit my plan on a regular basis. And then there's one final aspect of the communication plan that we touch on, and that is the one-on-one with your employees. A lot of times you have these business owners that get so busy that they don't spend the time of saying, all right, I need to spend at least on a monthly or a quarterly basis having a one-on-one conversation with my employees. Because again, your goal is to always try to be driving and pouring into the employees to make sure that they're always managing and working towards your why, that they're meeting the core values of your company, and that they are being fulfilled. Because your ultimate goal is to get an employee to act as an owner. And there's nothing better than, again, having that one-on-one time with your leader that ultimately will drive to the top, float to the top. And now you're really working to having your whole entire team all on the same page.
And really, what you're discussing now is somewhat the work of a brand strategist. So it's very interesting how you incorporate that why, those core value inside the financial, basically, portions. And I rarely seen it. Actually, I've never seen it spoke this way. So I think it's not only unique, but gives you a brand advantage of your own, which is quite beautiful. You're talking about the annual plan. That's obviously the second basically key place for in your blueprint, perhaps. When you're talking about an annual plan, you just broke it down, I think, beautifully from obviously quarter, month, day, and so on. What do you think is typically the biggest struggle for small businesses when it comes to eating those daily goals? Is it because they don't have one? Is it because they don't know how to hit it? What's basically the biggest hiccup typically?
Yeah, it's really all of the above. So a lot of times when you talk about putting a forecast in place, or you talk about anything that's a forward-looking view, a lot of people will just freak out. They go, man, I just don't know. I just don't know what to do. And so they just stop. And so if you really don't have anything to shoot for, you don't really know how to measure, right? Because again, if you're not driving your business forward, you're just looking at the results and saying, well, crap, that didn't work. And so you just really don't know what to do. You're always looking backwards. And so the struggle really a lot of times comes from they don't know how to put a plan in place. Again, we'll call it an annual plan or an annual budget. They don't know how to do that. And so they don't put the right measures in place to work backwards. And so they just kind of exist and hope and prayer and make it happen. And a lot of times they stumble their way to growth, but there will be a point in every business where you'll reach a ceiling and there's nothing more that you can do and you'll have to change something up. But again, I think it's really just a lack of knowledge.
Right. And you're talking a lot about reverse engineering here, which is so key, this idea in which you have an annual basically plan further down the line, and therefore being able to reverse engineer to again a daily, a weekly, and a monthly type of schedule. One thing that I see a lot in the small business world is the misunderstanding of what's possible, what they want, and what's possible, which I'd love for you to be able to talk about that distinction. Obviously, as small business owners, we always have, well, most have, I suppose, a dream of growing at such an incredible rate. We see these startups emerging, and we're like, man, this is a gold mine. When you're working with a small business owner, how do you perhaps synergize or balance the I want this and hey, here's what's possible and how we're going to make it?
Yeah. And so that's a good question. So really, like, again, when you look at the majority of my clients today, they have all hit some type of a growth ceiling, and it really is varied. Some of it is $1 million a year. I've got some clients at 30 million. I've worked with some that are at 80 million. They've just reached the ceiling and said, I just don't know what else to do. And so a lot of times if they've called a fractional CFO, they recognize that I'm at a limit. And they're just like, I just don't know what to do, which means they're ripe for advice. And so the goal that I try to do is I say, look, let's start with year one Give me your 3, 5, 10 year goal. Okay, that's perfect. We'll start backing into that. But the biggest thing is a lot of times you have to kind of re-baseline their business, and you got to prove to them, okay, look, your GL has changed 100 times, your sales targets is all over the place, you've got expenses that are all everywhere, and they flip flop from here to here, year over year. So a lot of times you have to re-baseline, because I'll tell them, you really have no clue how your business is performing, because you have tried. By that point, they typically have tried everything. They've tried everything. Well, maybe I'm looking at this expense wrong, so let me actually put it in this bucket versus that bucket. So we say, okay, step one, let's just re-baseline. Perfect. Now, I try to go through those 3 value drivers and say very small movements in those value drivers actually create a pretty large impact, right? So if you look at, I think it's traditionally, if you do a 3% price increase, a 3% cost reduction, and you bring in roughly 3% new business, making sure you're maintaining your margins, you can see a 10% year over year improvement in net income. That's just kind of how everything averages out. And so I say, are you okay with a 10% improvement in net income year over year? They're like, heck yeah, I've been stalled for 3 years. And that's typically how I can hook them and say, okay, let's quit shooting for the moon. Let's make sure that, again, we baseline year one, set a good thing in place to try to get a good 10% improvement in net income, and then we'll go from there. The other driver that I really try to make sure they focus on is, do they have enough cash for the growth? Again, they may have, your eyeballs are bigger than your stomach, or whatever the case may be, right? You want more than you can actually attain. And so my goal is to say, all right, let's put together this plan. And oh, by the way, that's going to cost you an additional $3 million in cash next year. Do you have that? Because, again, that's where the beauty of a finance guy is. We can put that plan in place and do some type of a cash flow projection. And they'll go, heck no, I can't do that. Okay, let's pull that back down. So I just try to use data as the main driver to keep them in check. But I do want to work with companies who do want to grow. The biggest thing is I just want to make sure that the growth is healthy and structured. And, again, you can make small moves that make a big impact.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that was interesting to me is now coming back basically to, not coming back, going forward to point 3, we touch marketing basically point 1, brand narrative, the why. Afterwards, obviously, point 2 is very much focused on data, finance. And then you talk a lot about healthy sales funnel that solves meaningful problems, in your words. So now basically going on the sales side, so truly an holistic basically model that is very interesting to see how they intertwine. How would you categorize basically a healthy sales funnel, and perhaps what are your main tips to be able to improve upon one?
Yeah, so if you go through sequentially, once you have an annual plan, let's just say that your desire for next year is to be a $12 million a year business. Well, now you know a target. And then you also know, well, my current backlog is only $1 million. So that means I've got to go find $11 million worth of work. I've got to figure out how to do that. Well, a healthy sales funnel would be a 2 to 3x of that, because you're not going to win everything you go get, right? It's just not going to happen. And so a lot of times when I'll sit with these guys and I'll say, okay, you need to develop a sales funnel, because they've been just a receiver. They've never strategically went out and tried to sell anything. So a lot of times they'll be like, well, I just don't know what to do. So what we'll try to do is we'll define, what is your niche? What are you trying? What is the perfect customer for you? And a lot of times they haven't really even thought about that. Then I'll say, okay, what's your unique product offering? What's your unique service offering? They've never thought about that. So once they know their niche and offering, now you can really put together a nice sales strategy. You can develop a marketing plan, and you can work towards having a 2 to 3x sales funnel. Now, I try to tell everyone that you're not expected to go get 33 million, but you need to come up with $33 million worth of ideas. And so when I draw it on the board and say, $33 million will drip out of the bottom at $1 million a month, that's what we have to do. But again, a lot of times they don't have that. So you take their very first year and you establish, what does that look like? I know that in order to get $1 million out of the bottom of the funnel, I have a fairly high win rate, XYZ. Now you start backing up into it and you say, I really don't need but a $15 million top, the funnel and dripping down. But the biggest thing is, what is your niche? What is your unique offering? And now what are you doing to really make sure you're driving the bookings and making sure you're hitting your sales? Because, again, if the bookings come in and they come in at a good rate, then now your sales are good going into your year. And then all the focus now turns to the operations side of it. So the front end of your business is controlled as long as you have a good sales funnel.
Coming back to the marketer in you, very very interesting, very interesting. It's so basically. Let me ask you this: when you're engaging within a business, a small business setting, who's typically the people with you within this conversation? The CEO, CMO, who's basically there to enhance the decision making?
Yeah, so typically it's the CEO and president. In most cases, they'll have a general manager or a COO that'll be along in the process as well. Also, again, since I'm kind of coming on the finance side, there'll be a controller who's involved in it because they've been so involved with the business up until that point. But it's traditionally the CEO and COO.
Right. That's what I thought. Obviously, you need your C-suite people to be on the same page there, specifically for point one. Obviously, the communication plan, as we know, that's dripping down the organization. So as long as your C-suite and decision makers are pretty much on the same page, that will obviously very much reflect in the actions, the behaviors of the people below them. One thing that we do very well inside of the people that we typically help is definitely basically your point four, which is you call it the monthly business review to reflect and refine. It's very interesting to me because specifically as a small business owner, as myself, we are always on the go to try to move forwards, and then the retrospection and the reflection is very hard because a lot of people think it's wasting time. I'm sure you hear that very often. And perhaps in your words, more than not wasting time, tell me more about just how important and how meaningful basically that reflection is to refine meaningful.
That's right. So going to play number two, you've developed an annual plan, meaning you have a roadmap saying this is where I'm hoping to achieve. This is my desired end target for the year. You do that a year in advance, right? So right now, my work and all my clients, we're setting our budgets and our plans for FY25. Okay. There's a lot of companies that do that. I want to be an $11 million a year company making $2 million in profit. Great. And that is where most people stop. So the very first thing we put in place is let's develop a forecast process because things change throughout the year. So I'm going to see it January 1. I want to be $1 million a year. Unfortunately, I didn't get some sales in, so I'm only going to be 800,000. That means I got to make sure I control my expenses X, Y, and Z because ultimately, I'm trying to build an entire year. So you run a forecast. You get to the end of January, you got to look back and say, I thought I was going to do 800K, but I actually did $1 million. Man, we're on track for plan. Let's just keep going. You come into February, you do it again. It's a rinse and repeat. The biggest thing is you're always comparing yourself to plan. How am I working to plan? You may get to March and say, I've had a stellar two months to start my quarter. I'm good to go. There's no need to drive or do anything crazy. Let's just keep going what we're doing. Or it could be the exact opposite of I've had a very difficult first 2 months. I really got to change some stuff in March to make sure that I hit my plan. And you've got the framework. You got your sales, you got your margin targets, your SG&A expenses. It all flows down to your net. You're always looking backwards and comparing to the plan and saying, okay, what do I need to do differently this month, this quarter to make sure I hit my year? And that is the biggest driver. So that's what we start with. It's to develop a forecast. Then you always look back and say, how close did I get to the actual forecast and the plan? And you make changes. The other aspect that we do in the monthly business review is we ensure that our sales and operations teams are properly aligned. The worst thing you can do is have a sales team go out and sell something that your operations team can execute, or your operations team trying to gear up for something thinking that your sales team is going to sell it and they don't sell it. And so we focus on our sales and operations planning. In that plan, you're reviewing your sales funnel. You're saying, hey, I anticipate customer X is going to go up to this. I'm getting some good traction on a new product we're doing here. This is what the market's telling us. And all of that is feeding into the ops team, making sure they have everything they need to succeed and execute on what the sales team is doing. So that's really the monthly business review. If you're doing that on a monthly basis, then you're always going to be somewhat in control of where have you come from, how can I control where I'm going, not only in the consecutive months, but what it looks like as you continue to progress, particularly as things are coming through that sales funnel that your operations team can execute.
Beautiful, and I think that's a must. The understanding of where we're going. It's really hard to get a target if you don't have one. Perhaps is always what I like to hear and see. Something that is interesting as well. Point five is truly this kind of like these re-enhancements of the employees plan. So obviously employees and your people is always at the a core driver of your business. I'll go as far as it your main assets obviously are your people. So you're diving a little bit into AHR now with point five. And we're talking about, and this is something you talk a lot about, which I really appreciate. You segment them, but then you harmonize empowering the company and empowering individuals. What's the distinction there, and how can basically small businesses become more intentional towards helping both of these basically key pillars to basically optimize business results?
Yeah. So when you come to your employees, your goal is to get them to act as an owner. On the flip side of that, your goal as an owner or leader is to delegate to your employees. And that means there's got to be an alignment in regards to what the owners or leaders' expectations are of their employees, and their employees must know what's expected of them. So the very first thing we try to put in place is a job description. And that is created by the leaders of the organization and saying, this is your job, this is what is expected of you, this is what qualifications means to make that happen, and we go from there. The second thing we put in place is once we have a job description, we're going to come up with some KPIs. What are some key performance indicators to make sure that you always know that you're on track, that the company knows you're on track, and as long as you're meeting those, then this job should be performing as expected. If you're not meeting your KPIs, then we have the one-on-one meeting, right, in the communication channel, where we're going to be working on what can we do to make sure that you're hitting your KPIs. So if every employee knows what they do and how they should do it, if they know how they're graded and they're hitting their grades, man, everything's great now, right? You should be executing just fine. So next piece is a lot of times it keeps people wondering is, well, what's my pay range? What am I supposed to be getting paid? That's critically important too, not only from just having the expectations met at the employee level, but you also need to have some type of a guardrail so you can make sure you do your budgets correctly, right? If a lot of times you say, oh, I'm just going to give this individual a raise, and it could be way beyond the market value where you've just blown your budget. So we put together pay ranges with that. And then one of the last aspects of it is we also want to make sure there's an organization chart. So if you break down the roles and responsibilities within the organization, then the employee needs to know where they sit in the organization chart, how are they in regards to their accountability within that, and who do they report up to, and what's the structure look like. Once all of that is established, then you can develop a bonus structure for that employee to make sure that if the company wins, they win, and then they actually now look at the piece as a ownership position, because I can now understand how my performance impacts the overall profitability of the company. And my goal is to make sure that I execute my stuff appropriately so the company wins. And then if the company wins, then you pay them for that execution. So now there's a bonus structure. And all of that, again, is all in an effort to try to get the employee to act as an owner.
Love it. Love it. For small businesses, you're talking about the bonus structure, which I think is so important. So they can be having a vested interest, skin in the game, perhaps, as we call it. When you're talking about their base salary, basically, what's typically the winning, is there a winning formula that you act on basically to determine it, the salary of an employee, or how would you do that meaningfully when a small business perhaps it's getting a little bit rougher. We know what happens, obviously, the ins and outs of that world. So how do you juggle that the tedious water?
Yeah. So one of the biggest errors or biggest mistakes that I see companies make is they will set a salary based off of the person. And I tell them you need to set the salary based off of the position, because it's one of two things, right? You could have an admin that just is a rock star. And, what does a typical admin get paid? $17 to $20 an hour. And they're like, man, I'm paying my admin $35 an hour. What the heck are you paying them $35 an hour for? They're just great. They help me da 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 da. And it's like, well, what you've just done is you're overpaying for that position, A. And now if you really care for your employee is now trapped because they have the admin qualification, they have the admin experience, and they're getting paid $35 an hour. They'll never be able to go anywhere, because they'll never get paid $35 as an admin, $35 an hour. And so now what you have to run the risk of, you're going to have a sour employee that's never going to leave because you've overpaid them. And so what I traditionally try to get people to do is, now that you have a job description, Go online. There's so many resources today that'll give you the information in regards to what are the salary ranges for said position. And if you see that there's an employee that is achieving above and beyond what that pay range is, try to give them additional work that, again, allows them to grow their scope, and they could potentially be promoted into a higher position as long as that is needed within the company. And so I try to get, again, these business leaders to make sure that they set the pay range based off of the job, not the person, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. Absolutely. And it's much easier to track that way because as the business will be growing and those positions will be duplicated, obviously it will be much easier to control basically costs and not just try to eyeball it because, well, I just like this employee better, which can be very dangerous. So kind of like the HR elements that you're talking about, do you typically basically discuss also with chief of staff or anyone basically within that world that makes those HR decisions, or how does that unfold? Is that directly to the CEO anyways?
Yeah, a lot of times it's the same person, right? The CEO or owner is the HR guy. But no, if we were to have those conversations, and there's an HR professional on site, they would be in those conversations.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I can imagine, no doubt. And one thing that is very interesting to close up this playbook, and it's come back all the way to your strategic mindset, but that I see a lot in everything that you're doing is value strategies that maximize impact. Now, when you're talking about maximizing impact, obviously we know how, in my opinion, impact is a direct correlation of income. The more impact you have in the world, typically the more income you will do. Even though there's the obviously distinguishable fashion between the two, why did you choose impact basically as a quantifier of the 6 steps basically model?
Yeah, so I was trying to think of more of from a marketing standpoint of I just needed a motto and some type of a slogan, and so I was like, okay, how do you really utilize that fractional, right? So how can I limit my impact to your bottom line, but make sure that you achieve the maximum results that you actually can? And so that's where it stemmed from is I want to make a fractional impact from a cost, but a major impact from a growth standpoint. And just impact was like the word that kind of stuck out to me. So that's why I picked it.
Great. Interesting. More of a marketing decision on your side than for the impact word. But truly, when you're thinking about obviously making the numbers matter, the CFO is so key, obviously, to understand not only where you've been, but where you're going. It's kind of like your financial GPS, as some likes to call it. But one thing that is very interesting within your concept, which I love to explain a bit more about your role as it unshapes not only the financial portion, but the purpose and the vision portion of it, which was very interesting. I came across this great quote, which I don't recall the author, but it's in business, it's not only about the bottom line, but it's basically about building something worth standing on. And that's so key, I believe, to modern businesses. This purpose and visions. When you're thinking of your role as a finance guy, but then your role as the North Pole encompassing business and purpose and visions, how does that perhaps make you feel, and how do you balance that without being overwhelmed personally?
Yeah, so it's been relatively unique. So for really the up until a year ago, I was a business turnaround guy. So companies would come in and hire me, and I would be the guy to make it happen. But I led the entire business. I didn't have any clients. They hired me so I could move and shake and do just about anything I needed to do to make sure that business turned around because I was the guy. And so that was that was natural to me, not that big of a deal. But then you start the fractional CFO stuff and you recognize, and again, this is part of the failure that Bracket had back in 2008, 9, and 10. The reason why I really didn't take off was they are an entrepreneur and a business owner for a reason. They do not want to necessarily be told what to do. They want to be the guys who are making the call. And it took 10 years for me to recognize the failure of Bracket originally was I had positioned myself incorrectly within the client's business. And when I had that aha moment, I thought that will be what changes. And so where I stay today is, and kind of how I position myself is, I work with the owners of the business or the leaders within the business, and I say, look, at the end of the day, this is your call. You're the one who's creating the culture. You're the one who is creating the drive. Again, I come from a very harsh, hard driving corporate background. If you want me to take your business and help you get that route, I will. Most of the time, these guys are like, no, I don't want no part of that. They're in a small business because they don't want the corporate mindset, right? So all I can really do is take a horse to water, but they're the ones who have to execute it. And so I give them all the information, all the data. I coach them all along the way, but at the end of the day, I will tell them flat out, this is your business. You can do what I'm asking you to do. You don't have to do it, but the results will be this if you do it. The results will be that if you don't. Then at the end of the day, it's your business, and that's how it works.
It does. It does. And one thing that I love to say about a couple of my employees and people around me is truly behind every number is a person, right? It's a dream. It's a chance to make it all work. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We're all free of making our choices. If you don't want to be part of this vision, if you want to take that route, let's not take that route. But perhaps there will be consequences to obviously both of these choices. It seems like to me at least, that you're quite a lovely but a assertive guys. How do you perhaps make sure that you position your pitch, because that's a pitch of some sorts of decision, a direction to those business owners, so it seems like a no-brainer to them, and they just embrace it with all their heart.
Yeah, so obviously I let the data do the talking. So I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and if you're not familiar with that, it's really a toolbox and a set of tools of how you go through continuous improvement. And the one thing that it taught me was utilize these tools and let the data do the talking, not you. And so I incorporate that same exact mindset and process into when I'm working with these clients, right? I just let the numbers do the talking. And for me, I started in operations and ultimately moved into finance. And so I can bridge the gap and say, this is your numbers. And if you really want to make a change in this is the knob you have to turn over there. Then I can also say, oh, if you anticipate doing this in the operations, this is what's going to happen to you on the finance side. And so again, I just use data and facts. I try to take all the emotion out of it. And that's been well received so far, again, because I can kind of bridge that gap between execution and the finance side. And so let the data do the talking. Try to keep the emotion out of it. Try to keep the opinions out of it, and say, "Hey, this is the data. This is what it's showing you."
Right. No, stories give us the insights, and data tells us about the future. It's to me, it's very interesting. Like I said, how you incorporate all of these distinct core departments that we typically see in business into one financial model. And I want to pick your brain a little bit more about, in your opinions, as you're obviously within a lot of businesses, a lot of different industries as well, what does it mean to lead with visions when you're talking about inspiring growth and accountabilities, and truly focusing on basically trust and perhaps the culture, and what does that bring to a company? How does one how do you basically separate the non-visionary basically businesses out there to those which have one and therefore perform better?
Yeah, so I need to do a better job of this, but I my goal is in the onboarding, which is in the first couple of days that we have a relationship. I really try to establish what is the owner's vision. So I have one owner who he has a vision of giving X amount of money away per year. He's like, I want to be within 8 to 10 years, I want to be able to give X amount of money away, and that is my goal. Okay, perfect. Let's back into that. I have his vision. I know what he wants to do. Now I'm going to help him financially and operationally hit that. I have another client who says, I'm a mom and pop company. I want to take this thing to a corporate level because I want to grow it across the country. Okay, well, that means you need to learn how to operate at a very high executive level. That's his vision. I want to go from mom and pop to more of a corporate mindset. Perfect. I know what to do. I've lived in that world. I can help you get there. I've got another client that says, I've started this business. I came from the ministry. I want to go back to the ministry. Therefore, I'm going to turn this company over to my son, but he's not ready. Okay, I'll help you execute that vision. I'll train your son on what it takes to run this business, and I'll be along with the ride and can help you make sure that you get all the information, you understand what's going on as you're out in the mission field, right, and understand the ministry. And so, again, once you work with me and tell me this is what I'm going to try to do, then I tailor my services and how I communicate based off of that. But the biggest thing is I got to make sure that whatever the owner's vision is, the entire company has that. And so that's where we go into that mission, vision, core values, We'll do an entire offsite just to establish that. And then I try to make it a part of all the communications that we have with the employees. And I make it come from the owner. Let's have conversation. Always cast your vision as to what, where am I trying to go and how are we working towards execution of that vision. We just make it a part of the DNA of the business and how it's ran.
Right. And talking about a DNA, one thing I'd like to pick your brain as well about is just your sheer abilities to, even if the goals is completely different, the industry is completely different, the people obviously are wildly different. It takes a lot of mental basically to be very, very astute when it comes to not only your business knowledge, but also shaping your I wouldn't say reshaping your personality, but having a character in which can be basically embedded to all of these different visions is something that is obviously quite unique. For you specifically, how did you train yourself to be able to juggle basically a lot of balls at the same times, but being able to do such things and basically paint that beautiful paintings anyways, even though your responsibilities will change from project to projects? Tell me more about how you cultivate that flexibility within yourself.
Yeah. So, the flexibility that I really utilize a calendar, right? A calendar and Microsoft OneNote, and I take a ton of notes. That's how I can keep it all separate because, yes, I have 7 emails, and I've got I've got to go from 1 hour to the next on. Okay, I'm working on this client. I get to put that down, start this, do that, so on and so forth. So I utilize white space. Every hour of the day is planned a week in advance. And that's just how I kind of keep everything separate. When it comes to execution of my clients' different visions, it really still all comes back to the financial side of things. And so we'll use the example of the guy who wants to go back into the mission field. Okay, so what does it look like? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? And I write all that stuff down. Okay, what is a comfort level that you'll say, hey, I would feel comfortable going back into the ministry when my revenues are this and my profits are that. Now I've got a financial target. Okay, that's the stuff that we got to make sure that you can delegate and get off your plate. Here's where you're financially going to be comfortable. Here's where you're at. And then we just start bridging the gap. And that becomes a part of what we do from a planning aspect. That's okay. Again, I got the other client says X amount of money within 8 to 10 years. Okay, that's a goal. We can back into that. I got the missions guy says, I potentially want to be gone in 3 years. Okay, I can back into that. And it's just really taking what's your desire, what's your starting point. Now let's bridge that gap. Again, it's all from a data and financial aspect, and that's just how we go.
It's very interesting to me. Like I said, there's and not to give you flowers, but there are very few people that can be able to handle all these responsibilities with different project, different scope every single time. It's something that is very interesting to me, and why I wanted to have you in this podcast in the first place. Since you're so close to leadership, you're always obviously working with the CEO, working with the president, getting very close basically to those decision makers. In your opinion, specifically for small businesses, what's the difference between a great leader and not a good one, perhaps?
Yeah. So it's very clear. I've seen it play out. Again, you go back to my time as a business turnaround guy. Your best leaders are the ones who can look in the mirror and acknowledge that I'm the problem. Right. That's where it starts. So John Maxwell has in the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership, he has a law called the law of the lid. And that means, if you've ever read that book, if you don't know what that means, it means if your leadership capability and your leadership rating is a 5, then your company's never going to be better than a 5. That means if you've got 6, 7, 8s that are beneath you, they're going to get frustrated and they're going to leave. And your organization will only be a level 5 organization. If you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I suck as a leader, I'm going to hire someone to delegate and help me in my weaknesses. Now, all of a sudden, you open yourself up to improve your overall business. And so, again, the best organizations are the ones that says, I'm not capable of doing that, so let me hire and delegate to someone who is, and they'll see their organization blossom. But they've got to be able to look in the mirror and be real with themselves and say, I'm just not good at this. And if they can do that, then that's a powerful position to be in.
If it's not your genius, it's not your job. And I learned that very quickly from one of the most interesting leadership person I ever come across. To me specifically, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. leadership is not just about being in control, but it's about giving the people control over what matters, right? And you talk about delegation a little bit in this episode, but I'd like if we can dive even deeper into it, even for you specifically, since your responsibilities are typically quite majors. How do you basically balance the control over the, I suppose, the decision makings to make sure that you are there to enhance the business? But like you said, at the end of the day, it's the people within the business that still make the decisions. How do you basically balance your portion of that decision making and the power you have over it, and basically let go and let God, perhaps, when it comes to then
Yeah.
making a good or bad decision?
Yeah. So how I try to position myself, again, traditionally I am in the CFO seat, albeit I'm in a very odd spot because I'm not an employee and I'm being hired by the owner or the president, CEO to work alongside of them. But technically I do report to them. And so I really have to straddle the fence in regard to how do I act as a coach and a mentor and a driver, but also be respectful of the position, particularly when we're in other settings. And so what you'll find is a lot of times I will have one-on-ones with the owner. So I got to put that hat on as a consultant coach, whatever you want to call me. And then we'll come out of that office. I got to take that hat off and put the CFO hat on and go sit in a meeting and act as an employee. And so it's tough, right? It's tough. But what I try to do is, again, we go back into how do we make sure that they're winning the day, the so on and so forth. We develop metrics, and I have my own set of metrics as I report as a CFO, and then the ops guy has his, so on and so forth. And I'm working on all that, but it is a text message as I'm sitting in the meeting to the owner saying, you need to ask this question, right? It's coaching. And so I just have to straddle that fence of, if I'm sucking on something on the finance side, obviously I own it because I need to keep the contract going, and so I'll try to fix it. But it's an odd dynamic to be coaching on how to manage that and handle that, and also sit as an employee. So it's just one of those things I had to figure out how to do.
Right. Very unique position, very unique positions. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful, actually. I think there's novelty within that complexity, perhaps. And something that is interesting to me that, again, I kind of like tie the ball when it comes to these conversations is when you're a very long-term minded person. You were talking about basically that time where some of your colleagues tell you that you were leaving them in the dust because you were too far in advance. But when you're thinking about just how important it is to build a foundation on that visions, on that purpose, on that missions, to make sure that we build obviously on a strong foundations that will not just crumble once we're past the point of basically financial freedom, perhaps, which is typically an objective of most small business owners. Can you give me some practical wisdom, some things that people can hear on this podcast and directly basically go and apply in their business to foster this idea that playing the ball game today is important, but playing for the ball game in 5 years is as important or more important?
Yeah. So from a practical aspect, it really depends on where you're at in your business. If you really are frustrated and you're really struggling with growth, you're going to have to take some time away and develop some type of a vision as to where you want to go. And you're just going to have to separate yourself and just say, all right, look, this is where I'm at. This is where I want to go. And you got to really check yourself. Like we said earlier, you got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, am I the guy or girl that can take us there? So you just need to separate, get out of the day-to-day. You need to spend, like for me, I try to take like Friday mornings to, okay, I'm finishing this week. I'm preparing for next week. Do that exact same thing. Be very intentional with, I'm going to set some time aside to work on my business and work and look at stuff going forward. If you don't do that, if you don't take any time to try to work on your business or at least look somewhat in the future, you really may look up one day and realize that your business is way off the track and it may not come back. And so you just got to set aside time to work on your business at some point and make sure that you have a vision. You could have started this business at X thinking this is what I want to do. And through circumstances and through struggles and fights, you'd realize, man, I am nowhere along the path that I thought I was going to be. Then once you recognize that, you can methodically work your way back to, this is why I started the business and let me move forward. But you have to step out of the day-to-day and start working on your business at some point.
Interesting. And to me, a meaningful business is not just basically creating a legacy, but it's about changing lives. It's about how you operate within your community, how you operate within the people you serve as well. When you're thinking about, we live in a world now, starting a business never been this easy, and I'm sure you will agree with this, that the threshold to entry has been lowered, which we can discuss, but I think it's a good thing altogether. I think competition foster innovation, which is a beautiful thing. But when you're thinking about meaningful as a core brand differentiator and what it means basically to build a meaningful business for you to sustain the test of times, would you say that it's more important than ever now to basically focus on truly the intangibles, as I like to call them, because the tangibles now are so fiercely competitive that if you don't master the intangibles, somebody will basically outpace you.
Yeah. So I have one client that I would say he has the healthiest overall business, not only from a sales revenue and net profit position, but also culture, and that I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, it's amazing when you walk into his business how well everything is, and then also how well his financials are. And the number one thing he told me, because he knows me and he knows I could be harsh in corporate background. He said, I don't care what you do, but you will not jack up my culture. And what he focuses on is really the intangibles. And so it's very easy to see that he operates all on the intangible side of things, because that's kind of how who he is as a person and how it has resulted in profits and growth in his business. It's because he's hired good people, he treats them well, and they work their butts off for him. All he really needs is someone to kind of help come behind him and kind of focus on some of the tangibles, but it's all the intangible stuff that has just absolutely led to where he's at today. So I would definitely agree to that, because again, it's the intangible stuff that's going to have long-lasting impacts to your business, from solid, committed employees who, again, they're committed to you, they're committed to the business. It all will translate into a tangible side, but I've seen it firsthand. This guy has mastered that side of the business for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. I think that focusing on things that numbers can explain sometimes is such an advantage, because when you have a great CFO, when you have great people in place, the metrics is one thing, but the people behind it, the culture above it, perhaps, is also something to always keep in mind and have your eyes on fostering that culture. Because, and I'm sure you will agree with this, but when you lose it, or when it's on the wrong track, it's going downhill very, very quickly, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, it can sneak up on you, and then it could be too late. So, no, I 100% agree with that.
Well, Mr. Stewart, Ervin, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcast and truly diving deeper into some of the financial delicacy and how that operates within the holistic frameworks. I would absolutely be honored if you share some of your last thought with our audience, please.
Yeah, the biggest thing I want to make sure, if you're running a business and you're struggling, that there are opportunities and there are options out there that you just need to reach out. I think for me, the biggest goal that I have from a fractional CFO standpoint is, I love helping small businesses, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that this small business owner or leader is really living a full life. So many times these owners, they'll get to the point because their company's either out of control or they've hit a ceiling, and they're just so frustrated, or they're so scared, concerned, you name it. And my request is reach out to someone who can come in and help you, because it's crazy how quick of an impact someone who understands how much of an impact they can make to your business, which will allow you to have a more fulfilled life, right? It'll help you tremendously in your business, but also will spill out into your personal life. If you knew that you could come in every day and know how you performed yesterday, and know that someone's alongside of you, you knew that you can lean on, that you can ask questions to, and ultimately know that my business is healthy and moving in the right direction, it can't help but make you a more fulfilled person, not only professionally, but on the personal side. So don't give up. Reach out to an expert. There's so many options out there that are fairly economical. Just know that there's options out there.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.